Dana Dharman, the acts of charity. Raja Dharman, pragmatic activities of the kings. Moksha Dharman, the acts for salvation. Vibhagasha, by divisions. Stri Dharman, duties of women. Bhagavat Dharman, the acts of devotees. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur points out here, because we see we're talking about acts of charity, or the Dharma of charity, the Dharma of kings, the Dharma of liberation, the Dharma of women, and then finally the Dharma of devotees. He says the reason that's mentioned last is because it's the most important. Interesting, because often the most important is mentioned first, but he's saying in this case that's not so. Samasa, generally. Vyasa, this is also very interesting. Vyasa is translated here as being explicitly. Explicitly. You can repeat that. Yogata, by means of. Yeah? It's very interesting that he has translated Vyasa as meaning explicitly. And also another way it's translated, of course we know it's referring to Vyas, the personality of Godhead who's presented the Vedic literatures, but it can mean in detail. So Vyas refers obviously to Vyasadeva, but also means explicitly in detail. So we can see that Vyas is that person who gave in great detail or explicitly detailed the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the Srimad Bhagvatam. So it's quite interesting to see it being translated like that. Translation. He then explained by divisions acts of charity, the pragmatic activities of a king, and activities for salvation. He then described the duties of women and devotees, both briefly and extensively. Responsively, please. He then explained by divisions acts of charity, the pragmatic activities of a king, and activities for salvation. Then he described the duties of women and devotees, both briefly and extensively. So it's quite normal when a person is teaching something is to start with, they'll give a synopsis and saying, okay, this is what I'll cover. And then they go into great detail to explain these things in detail. And saying here, explicitly or in detail, he explained all these different divisions of knowledge. And we see, where is it? In the translation, or the transliteration says, Vibhagashaha, by division. Purport, it's quite a lengthy purport. Goes over 1, 2, 3 and a bit pages. So I'll read some and then just speak a little bit, because I won't remember it. By the time we get to the end of it, I would have forgotten the start of it. So, to give charity is one of the householder's main functions, and he should be prepared to give in charity at least 50% of his hard-earned money. A brahmachari or student should perform sacrifices. A householder should give in charity. And a person in the retired life or in the renounced order should practice penances and austerities. Those are the general functions of the ashrams, or orders of life on the path of self-realization. In the brahmachari life, the training is sufficiently imparted so that one may understand that the world as property belongs to the Supreme Lord, the Personality of Godhead. No one, therefore, can claim to be the proprietor of anything in the world. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, because we see that everyone is claiming to be the proprietor of so many things. It means they don't understand who it all belongs to. They don't understand where it comes from. Therefore, in the life of a householder, which is a sort of license for sex enjoyment, one must give in charity for the service of the Lord. Everyone's energy is generated or borrowed from the reservoir of energy of the Lord. Therefore, the resultant actions of such energy must be given to the Lord in the shape of transcendental loving service for Him. I thought this was a really important statement, actually, so I'll say it again. Everyone's energy is generated or borrowed from the reservoir of energy of the Lord. Everything comes from the Lord. And if we understand that, it's just like that verse in the Gita, Aham savasya pravo mata sarvam bhavatati, iti matva bhajante mam, buddha bhava samanvita, that I am the source. Krishna explains to Arjuna, this is one of the first of the chapter sloki. He says, I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. This is savasya, everything. There's nothing in existence that hasn't come from Krishna. Even your iPhone or your mobile phone has come from Krishna in its different components. Everything's come from Krishna. And then he says, iti matva bhajante, knowing me like this, Buddha bhava samanvita, the intelligent people worship me with all their hearts. So we see that one who actually understands, it's just like, someone may work for a person, and that, a wealthy person, he has so much property. Now someone who actually understands that this all belongs to this wealthy person will use those things in the service of the wealthy person. As soon as they start to use those things for their own enjoyment, they're called a thief. If they take the rich man's car and they drive off to meet their girlfriends, they do this, they do that, they go all over the place and they treat it like their own car, then they're considered to be a thief. But as long as that we're using those things in the service of the Lord, then we're actually rightfully situated in our determination, because we're understanding how everything belongs to Krishna. And that's one of the really interesting things of this pastime, because we see how this is the passing away of Bhishma Dev. Now, when the Pandavas were fighting at Kurukshetra, and like the greatest opponent they had at Kurukshetra was Bhishma. No one else was as powerful, not Karna, not Drona, not anyone. No one was as powerful as Bhishma. And Arjuna realized he couldn't defeat him. He just couldn't defeat him. Even we see that, when if we go back, in the history, when Vichitravirya wanted to get married, then Bhishma went to, I can't remember whose palace it was he went to. There was 3 girls who were, they were sort of putting themselves forward for marriage. And Bhishma went and he captured all of them. And, the story goes on, and it's like one of the girls had already given her heart to Jarasandha. And it was Jarasandha or Shalva? Shalva, yeah, Shalva. And so she couldn't marry Vichitravirya, so Bhishma said, yes, fine, you go back to him. But he wouldn't accept her. He said, no, you've been in another man's house, I can't take you now. And so anyhow, she was desperate to get married, so she went and saw Bhishma, and she said, Bhishma, you have to marry me. He said, no, I've taken a lifelong vow of brahmacharya. And then so she performed penance and austerities, and finally she went to Parashuram. And Parashuram, she pleased Parashuram. Parashuram said, don't worry, I'll get Bhishma to resolve this situation. And so he went to Parashuram, Parashuram went to Bhishma, and he said, you should fight. You should marry this girl. And he said, no, I've taken a vow of brahmacharya, I won't do it. And he said, I'm instructing you to do this. He said, no, I've taken a vow of brahmacharya, I won't do it. So then Parashuram fought him. And they fought for days and days and days. And Parashuram realized he couldn't defeat him. A plenary, like a Shaktivesh incarnation of the Lord, who's blessed with the potency to fight. He's given Krishna's potency to fight, and he couldn't defeat Bhishma. And they fought for 21 days or something like that. It was a long time, and he couldn't defeat him. And then so, on the battle of Kurukshetra, Arjuna could also see, I can't defeat him. He had this benediction from his father Shantanu that he would die when he wanted to die. He would give up this body when he wanted to die. So, and he wasn't willing to do it. But the Pandavas, they had this. They knew it was Krishna's will that they should win the battle, and that Yudhisthira would be established as the king. So they were determined that they had to win this war, but they knew they couldn't defeat Bhishma. So what happened one night after the battle is they went to Bhishma's tent in the Kauravas' camp. Now, it's kind of interesting because Bhishma, even though we understand he's a pure unalloyed devotee of Krishna, he's in the camp of the Kauravas. He's fighting for the Kauravas, and sometimes we see that people would criticize Bhishma for that. But Bhishma, being a great devotee of the Lord, he understood the Lord's intention. He understood the Lord's mind. And so he knew that he was rightfully situated being in that situation. It wasn't because of financial obligation to the Kauravas or anything like that. It was because he understood the Lord's desire. He understood how the Lord wanted things to play out. He understood that he wanted the Pandavas to be the rulers of the world. And he also understood his role in that, and that he would have to die as a result. But he was willing to offer his life for the service of Krishna. So we see that what happened was that Yudhisthira and the Pandavas, they went to see Bhishma at night in his tent during the battle. And the Pandavas, they had tears streaming from their eyes. And they were so affectionate and loving towards Bhishma. And they said, the only way, Krishna wants us to win this battle. We understand that. The Supreme Lord he wants Yudhisthira to be the emperor. But the only way we're going to do that is if Arjuna kills you. So please explain to us how that can be achieved. And Bhishma was in ecstasy. He was so happy to hear this. He said, I've been waiting for this, that I can actually give my life for the pleasure of Krishna. And so then he instructed Arjuna that you keep Shikhandi in front and you fire arrows. Because I won't fight with Shikhandi because he's a woman in a previous life. He was Amba, the person who was supposed to marry Vichitravirya, or actually was supposed to marry Shalva, but was rejected. And so, she had this, when she was Amba, she had this intense desire to want to kill Bhishma. And then so took birth as Shikhandi. But Bhishma wouldn't fire arrows at Shikhandi because he was a woman in his last life. Even though he was actually the son of Drupad, he wouldn't fire arrows at him. So then during the battle, Arjuna was firing arrows at because Krishna made the arrangement. Krishna said, put Shikhandi in front and engage only with the preceptor, with Bhishma. And so Arjuna did that, but his heart wasn't in it. His heart, when he was shooting the arrows, but he was half-hearted. He wasn't pulling his bow back far. He wasn't really putting his full force into it. So the arrows were just bouncing off. Because it said that Bhishma, his body was as hard as steel. And Bhishma was goading him. He said, shoot harder, Partha, shoot harder. You have to shoot your arrows harder. Otherwise they won't penetrate. And also Krishna was pushing Arjuna on, but he wasn't doing it. So then Bhishma, he really rained arrows down on Arjuna, trying to incite him to fight. And it got to the point that he actually knocked him off the chariot. He knocked Arjuna off the chariot. And Krishna saw that this is not working. So then what happened was Krishna, he got down off the chariot and he started to run at Bhishma. And as he's running, I was talking yesterday the day before yesterday, how his wrapper, his chaddar's flapping in the breeze. And as he's running towards Bhishma, he picked up a chariot wheel and to throw it at Bhishma, to kill Bhishma. And Bhishma just dropped his weapons. He says, come, O Madhava. He was just praying for the Lord. You please come. You please, take my life. And Arjuna is running behind him, and Arjuna grabbed him around the body and slowing down. He says, no, you made this vow that you wouldn't take weapons in this battle. And don't break your vow on behalf of me. I'll fight, I'll kill him. So Krishna had to go through this whole play just to incite Arjuna. And then so he got back on Krishna got back on the chariot, and then Arjuna started to fight with full force, and he was just raining arrows down on Bhishma. They were entering his body and passing through his body and sticking out both sides and stuff. And it's described in the Mahabharata. In one version of the Mahabharata, there were so many arrows in his body you couldn't put 2 fingers in between each arrow. Everywhere from the neck down. He wouldn't shoot his face. Arjuna wouldn't shoot arrows in his face. But from the neck down, it was all just arrows, like a pincushion. So many arrows in it. And then Bhishma fell from the chariot. And it's described because the battle went for 18 days, and he left on the 4th or 5th day. And then there was some time after the battle that they did all the different, ceremonies and rites. And then when Yudhisthira went back to Hastinapur and he was enthroned as a king of that. And then finally they returned to Kurukshetra and they sat and they listened to Bhishma speak for about 2 months. Different accounts, they give different stories. But apparently there's a plaque. I haven't been to Kurukshetra, but I heard there's a plaque at Kurukshetra where it says that Bhishma lay on that spot, on this bed of arrows, for 6 months. He could have chosen to leave his body at any time he wanted to, but he wanted to wait for Krishna to come. And it mentions here in the Mahabharata, in the Bhagavatam. I think it's in a few verses' time, actually. A really nice verse. I think it's about verse 43, 44, something like that. Yes. Bhishma just meditates on the Lord and he's just reflecting on his good fortune, how Krishna has actually come before him, and that was his desire, that he would quit his body, seeing the Lord. And so Krishna, to fulfill his desire, because he is the Lord's undeviating devotee, he's the unswerving devotee of the Lord. He's not distracted by that, anything in this material world. He actually understood that Krishna was his Lord and Master, so very, very focused on the Lord. And he maintained his life until Krishna actually came before him. So I'll try and finish the purport. It's quite a lengthy purport. So in the brahmachari life, the training is sufficiently imparted so that one may understand the world as property belongs to the Supreme Lord of the Personality of Godhead. So that's, in the beginning, we see that brahmacharis are trained so that they understand that nothing belongs to me, it all belongs to Krishna. And so if the brahmachari does enter into grihastha life, he doesn't become too entangled in all this stuff, because he understands that ultimately it doesn't belong to me. Therefore, no one can claim to be the proprietor of anything in the world. Therefore, in the life of a householder, which is sort of a license for sex enjoyment, one must give in charity for the service of the Lord, because by giving in charity, the grihastha becomes purified. If the grihastha tries to hold on to all these things, they become attached to these things and they try to enjoy it. But if they give in charity, it helps them to understand that everything actually belongs to Krishna. Everyone's energy is generated or borrowed from the reservoir of energy of the Lord. Therefore, the resultant actions of such energy must be given to the Lord in the shape of transcendental loving service for Him. And this is a really nice analogy. As the river draws water from the sea through the clouds and again go down to the sea, similarly our energy is borrowed from the Supreme Source, the Lord's energy, and it must return to the Lord. So just as we see, that the sun evaporates the water from the ocean, it rains down on the land, it goes into the rivers, then it flows back to the sea. It goes back to its source. So in the same way, everything we have, our bodies, our intentions, our mind, whatever, all our possessions, they actually come from Krishna. So it's just appropriate and natural that these things should all go back to Krishna. That is the perfection of our energy. The Lord, therefore, in the Bhagavad Gita 9:27, who knows that verse, 9:27? Yad karosi, yad asnasi, yad shihosi dasya, yad tapasyashi kunteya, tad karushramadapanam. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, give away, whatever austerities you perform, you do that, O son of Kunti, as an offering for me. So Krishna is saying that whatever we have is actually meant to serve Krishna. It says whatever we do, whatever we undergo as penance, whatever sacrifice, whatever we eat, or whatever we give in charity, must be offered to Him, the Lord. That is the way of utilizing our borrowed energy. When our energy is utilized in that way, the energy is purified from contamination of material inebrities, and thus we become fit for our original natural life of service to the Lord. So this is a simple process. Whatever you have, you just offer it to Krishna, and in that way it becomes all the material inebrities are removed, the attachments are removed, and then one becomes purified and becomes fit for our natural, original life of service to the Lord. Raja Dharma is a great science Unlike, and Prabhupada speaks very strongly here, unlike modern diplomacy for political supremacy, the kings were trained systematically to become munificent and not merely be tax collectors. And we see that if you look at the modern age, they're just looking at the modern politicians, they're just looking at different ways they can tax people to get more money out of them so they can have a better lifestyle. How much good works they're doing for the people in general. How are they trying to help people, advance in spiritual life? They're actually not doing anything to help. It's all about just taxing and shoring up their positions. They were trained to perform different sacrifices only for the prosperity of the subjects. To lead the prajas to the attainment of salvation was a great duty of the king. The father, the spiritual master, and the king are not to become irresponsible in the matter of leading their subjects to the path of ultimate liberation from birth, death, diseases, and old age. What verse is Prabhupada paraphrasing there? Do you know? From the 5th canto, 5th chapter. Guru nasat sat svajano nasat pita nasat janani nasat sat. The one should not take the service of being a guru, a father, a worshipful demigod, or any of these important positions unless they are capable of delivering their dependents from the cycle of repeated birth and death. So, responsibility means that you can deliver your dependence. If you're not capable of delivering your dependence, then don't take responsibility. Because actually what will happen is because you can't deliver yourself, therefore you can't deliver them. You're going to be bound up in this material world, therefore those that follow you will remain in this material world. And this is actually a great sin, is not to guide people properly. When these primary duties are properly discharged, there is no need of government of the people, by the people. In modern days, the people in general occupy the administration by the strength of manipulated votes, but they are never trained in the primary duties of a king, and that is also not possible for everyone. So Prabhupada is really plainly pointing out here that people manipulate the votes. They promise all types of things which they can never deliver. And basically what they're doing is they're promising a better standard of sense gratification. We'll give you more money in your paycheck, we'll give you more time off, we'll give you this, we'll give you that. They're promising all these things which they'll never deliver. Because in reality what happens is, I was talking to someone about this yesterday, is the companies are just pushing the workers to work more, get paid less, and be more productive. And the same as they outsource things to other companies. They're trying to squeeze the companies, to produce more, 10% less. They do this sort of stuff all the time. And in the end, what happens is the end user suffers because it's all about profit. They don't care about the end user. They don't care about the customer. That's not their interest at all. They just look at the figures on the graph. Profits going up, costs going down. That's what they want to see. Under the circumstances, the untrained administrators play havoc to make the subjects happy in all respects. And because the subjects are untrained, because the leaders are untrained, they don't know how to train the subjects. Therefore, the subjects think the goal of life is sense gratification, because the leaders think the goal of life is sense gratification. But if the leaders understood the goal of life, the Swatakatim hi Vishnu was actually to attain the lotus feet of Vishnu, and they trained the subjects to that same end, then they would understand how to make them happy. They would understand what their duty was. But because they don't understand, then they're just misleading. And that, therefore, the International Society of Krishna Consciousness has a great duty to try to train all people, especially leaders, in understanding what is the goal of life and how to achieve that goal of life. So that's why distributing Prabhupada's books, etc., is very, very important. And a meeting with different leaders and things, very important to try to help them understand what the goal of life. Actually, I read something really interesting on Twitter today. There's a devotee in Hawaii, and she's a politician. She's actually an elected member. Her name's Tulsi Gabbard. And she's planning to run for the President of the United States. So I think it'd be quite interesting if she actually wound up being the President of the United States. To have a she chants Hare Krishna, she chants japa, she's initiated. She's not an ISKCON devotee, I think she's a follower of Narayana Maharaj, but the fact of it is she's a Gaudiya Vaishnava. And to have someone like that in office would be quite interesting. Anyhow, let's see if that's Krishna's will. On the other hand, these untrained administrators gradually become rogues and thieves. I mean, look at the current Prime Minister of Australia, look at the current President of the United States, or so many countries around the world. They're just rogues and thieves. They're just saying all sorts of stupid things, disturbing people, stealing, cheating, lying. They just say anything just to maintain their position. All you have to do is just look at the Australian political parties, the things they do to try and maintain their positions. And the fact of it is they can't maintain their position. They get voted out by their party. I mean, how many times in Australia in the last few years have we had changed prime ministers? So many times. It's just, and they're all just like jockeying for position. They're not interested in policy. They're not interested in serving the people. And so Prabhupada is saying here, on the other hand, these untrained administrators gradually become rogues and thieves, and increase taxation to finance a top-heavy administration that is useless for all purposes. Actually, the qualified brahmanas are meant to give directions to the kings for proper administration in terms of scriptures like the Manu Samhita and the Dharma Shastras of Parashara. A typical king is the ideal of the people in general, and if the king is pious, religious, chivalrous, and munificent, the citizens generally will follow him. And this is the same for the brahmanas. The brahmanas also need to understand what is their role, what is, how they should conduct themselves, how they should, guide others, because the brahmana is understood to be the head of society. And if the brahmana, and Dina Bandhupa was making this point yesterday, that if the brahmana is not, doing his duty properly, then the other varnas won't know how to act. So this is one of the great fall downs in Kali Yuga, because the brahmanas actually gave up their duty. And therefore we see in Kali Yuga a very, very difficult time, because the brahmanas stopped doing what they're meant to do. A typical king is the ideal of the people in general, and if the king is pious, religious, chivalrous, and munificent, the citizens generally will follow him. They'll just follow him naturally. He doesn't have to force it. They'll just naturally follow him. Whereas we see now, the government has to force people to follow them by making all sorts of rules and regulations to force them to follow. But someone who's pious, religious, chivalrous, and munificent. Because you see that, what would happen with the Sudras is that the king would perform sacrifices and give the Sudras clothing and feed them sumptuously, and he'd become happy. But now there's nothing like this is happening. Most of the Sudras are struggling just to feed themselves. They're struggling to have a roof over their heads, because of this whole profiteering concept that's going on. People are just trying to make more and more money from the people. Such a king is not a lazy, sensuous person living at the cost of the subjects, but always alert to kill thieves and dacoits. And we see, the modern leaders, when there's a war, where are they? Thousands of miles from the battlefield. Whereas when there was the battle of Kurukshetra, where was Yudhisthira? Where was Duryodhana? They were right at the front of the battle. They were leading the troops. They were there on the battlefield, guiding and everything. Whereas these days, they're hiding in a bunker, hundreds of feet under the ground, just so they can survive. They're cowardly people. The pious kings were not merciful to dacoits and thieves in the name of nonsensical ahimsa, non-violence. The thieves and dacoits were punished in an exemplary way so that in the future no one would dare commit such nuisances in an organized form. Such thieves and dacoits were never meant for administration as they are now. You see, basically most of the leaders are just thieves and rogues. And the whole idea of, they have this organized crime, which is so prevalent in certain societies around the world. This never would have happened during the time of Maharaj Yudhisthira. It was usually just individuals doing things, but they have organized crime, they have organized terrorism. These things would not exist. They could not exist during the rule of a pious king. The taxation law was simple. There was no force, no encroachment. The king had a right to take 1/4 of the production made by the subject. The king had a right to claim 1/4 of one's allotted wealth. One would never grudge parting with it, because due to the pious king and religious harmony, there was enough natural wealth, namely grains, fruits, flowers, silk, cotton, milk, jewels, minerals, etc., and therefore no one was materially unhappy. The citizens were rich in agriculture and animal husbandry, and therefore they had enough grains, fruits and milk without any artificial needs of soaps and toilets, cinemas and bars. I mean, the society creates all these different artificial needs and neglects the things that are important. Therefore, their natural opulences dwindle, they diminish, and these artificial opulences increase. We see now, what's the like the big, what do you call it? There's so much abundance of technology. Like the car I've been riding around in the last few days, every control practically in the car has got a little LCD in it, LCD panel, which you turn the knob up, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the fan, or you turn the heat control up, it goes 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. It tells you degrees. It's just a little LCD panel. You open the car, the door handles pop out electrically. It's just like there's such an abundance of technology now. But it doesn't make people happy. But if they have sufficient grains, milk products, things like this, cloth, natural fibers. Now you go to the shops, you can't even buy natural fibers. They're all mixed with synthetics. But if you have sufficient natural opulences, then people become happy. But when they have these artificial things, they just become disturbed. The king had to see that the reserved energy of humanity was properly utilized. Human energy is meant not exactly for fulfilling animal propensities, but for self-realization. The whole government was specifically designed to fulfill this particular purpose. As such, the king had to select properly the cabinet ministers, but not on the strength of voting background. The ministers, the military commanders, and even the ordinary soldiers was all selected by personal qualification, and the king had to supervise them properly before they were appointed to the respective post. The king was especially vigilant to see that the tapasvis, or persons who sacrificed everything for disseminating spiritual knowledge, were never disregarded. What is the government doing in these days to see that the religionists are properly following their dharma? I mean, all they do really is like, when there's been something going wrong, they organise a royal commission to pull down all the churches. Because they don't know what the churches are meant to do. They don't know the role of religionists at all. They don't even know what the purpose of religion is. Therefore, their business is just to pull them down, and eventually you'll see they'll outlaw religion because it's just, it's corrupt. Not realising that it's their duty to see that the religion stays pure. To see that the Brahmins, the priests, to see the Brahmins and priests stay pure. This is the role of the king. But they don't understand that. And as a result, we see that, priests are completely disregarded in this day and age. They're considered useless, parasites on society. And then Prabhupada got an emphasis here, it's in italics. The king knew well that the Supreme Personality of Godhead never tolerates any insult to his unalloyed devotees. And that's the end of the emphasis. Such tapasvis were trusted leaders even of the rogues and thieves. We see in that prayer to the six Goswamis, says, Dira, Dira, Jana, Priyo, Priya, Priyo, Priya, Karo, that the Goswamis, they were dear to both the rogues and the gentle people. Dira, Dira, Jana, Priya. All people loved them because they were great devotees of Krishna, and they were always neutral in their attitude. So the rogues and thieves who would never disobey the orders of the tapasvis. The king would give special protection to illiterates, the helpless, and the widows of the state. Defense measures were arranged previous to any attack by the enemies. The taxing process was easy and not meant for squandering, but was for strengthening the reserve fund. The soldiers were recruited from all parts of the world, and they were trained for special duties. So this is all about the role of the Raja Dharma. Now the next section is, what is it? Raja Dharma. Huh? Moksha Dharma, okay. As far as salvation is concerned, one has to conquer the principles of lust, anger, unlawful desires, avarice, and bewilderment. To get freedom from anger, one should learn how to forgive. To get freedom from unlawful desires, one should not make plans. By spiritual culture, one is able to conquer sleep. By tolerance only, one can conquer desires and avarice. Disturbances from various diseases can be avoided by regulated diets. By self-control, one can be free from false hopes, and money can be saved by avoiding undesirable association. By practice of yoga, one can control hunger and worldliness. can be avoided by culturing the knowledge of impermanence. Dizziness can be conquered by rising up, and false arguments can be conquered by factual ascertainment. And this is a really good point. So often we hear, even within devotional circles, devotees they haven't understood points properly, or maybe they have an agenda and they'll present something in an improper way. But if they just, Prabhupada's saying here that that false arguments can be conquered by factual ascertainment. So that means we need to study the Shastra very deeply to understand points from all different angles, because we see in the Shastra sometimes things are presented in different ways. Just like yesterday we were talking on this one verse, this Krishna Varnam Tushar Krishnam. Now, if you look at the way that Prabhupada uses that, translates Krishna Varnam, for instance, he says always chanting Krishna. But another way he translates Krishna Varnam is in the category of Krishna. The Varna, it means like category or classification. So he's saying in the classification, he's Krishna. So in one way he says he's always chanting Krishna, another way he says he's in the category of Krishna. So there's different ways of translating different words. Or even the word in this verse, Vyas. Vyas generally refers to Vyasadeva, but it can mean explicitly or it can mean in detail. So by understanding these things from different angles of vision, then we can understand these things very deeply, and then we can overcome false arguments very easily, because we can actually present the fact of the matter and understand things according to time, place, and circumstance. Perfect talkativeness can be avoided by gravity and silence, and prowess can be avoided, and by prowess one can avoid fearfulness. Perfect knowledge can be obtained by self-cultivation. One must be free from lust, avarice, anger, dreaming, etc., to actually attain the path of liberation. So two important points that Prabhupada's making here at the beginning of this paragraph. He says one has to conquer the principles of lust, anger, unlawful desires, avarice, and bewilderment. And at the end he reinforces that, and he says one must be free from lust, avarice, anger, dreaming, etc. So same kind of statement, dreaming, bewilderment, because when one dreams excessively, then you become a little bit, especially daydreaming, you become bewildered. As far as the women class are concerned, they're accepted as a power of inspiration for men. As such, women are more powerful than men. Mighty Julius Caesar was controlled by Cleopatra. We see so many examples throughout history where women actually were controlling the men. Such powerful women are controlled by shyness. Therefore, shyness is important for women. Once this control valve is loosened, women can create havoc in society by adultery. And we don't need to look very far to see examples of that. This whole society is just, running on adultery. Adultery means production of unwanted children known as Vana Sankara, who disturb the world. The last item taught by Bhishma Dev was the process of pleasing the Lord. We are all eternal servants of the Lord, and when we forget this essential part of our nature, we are put into material conditions of life. The simple process of pleasing the Lord, for householders especially, is to install the deity of the Lord at home. By concentrating on the deity, one may progressively go on with the daily routine of work. Worshipping the deity at home, serving the devotee, hearing the Bhagavatam, residing in a holy place, and chanting the holy name of the Lord are all inexpensive items by which one can please the Lord. Thus the subject matter was explained by the grandfather to his grandchildren. It's also very nice, Prabhupada's paraphrasing another very nice verse there, Sadhu Sangha Nama Kirtan Bhagavat Shavan. Mathura Vasa Sri Mathura Shariye Sevan, that, the five most important principles of bhakti are to associate with devotees, chant the holy name, study the Bhagavatam, worship the deity with faith and veneration, and reside in a holy place. So these are very... Lord Chaitanya, he points out that even if one is simply a little bit connected with one of these things, a dormant love for God can be reawoken. So you may not necessarily even perfect yourself, but just by doing these things, it can help one to reawaken their dormant love of Krishna. So, very, very powerful purport here. And Srila Prabhupada, he's kind of basically giving a synopsis of what Bhishma was talking about in a very simplified form. But just, emphasizing these important points And especially, focusing at the end on this Bhagavat Dharma, which is ultimately achieving the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, I'll finish there. Any questions or comments at all?
Could you maybe say something on how we can make sure that we follow energies fully utilized for Krishna's pleasure?
It's kind of, in one way, I guess it's quite simple, because it's just like, but also it can be quite complicated, because sometimes it's hard to, if our consciousness is contaminated by material desires, then we can start to rationalize how our sense gratification, what we're doing for sense gratification, is actually for Krishna. But then by the guidance of others, if we have some doubt about what we're doing, you can go to senior devotees, to older devotees, to spiritual master, whatever, and ask for guidance. I'm doing this, and this. Is this? Do you think this is for my pleasure, or do you think I'm really doing this for Krishna's pleasure? You can ask for guidance, but you can also just be introspective and look within yourself and try to see, what is my motive here? Because really, only you can understand your true motive. So you just look at it and you ask yourself, what is my motive here? Am I really doing this for Krishna? Having a very powerful car that can do 250 kilometers an hour, a big V8 motor, chrome this, chrome that, all the fancy fittings in it. Is this really because I need it for Sankirtan, to go out and distribute Prabhupada's books, or is this because it's for my sense gratification? Like, okay, we need a watch to tell the time, but do I need a $5,000 Rolex, which doesn't tell the time any better than a $100 Seiko? You know what I mean? It's just you just got to look at it and see, like, am I just indulging my senses here, or am I doing this to please the Lord? And we see, like, Bhishma Dev, like in an ordinary situation, people would fight to save their lives. But Bhishma Dev understood this was what Krishna wanted. So not only was he willing to die for the Lord, he was he was ecstatic to die for the Lord. He wanted it. He was willing to give his life up because this was the plan of the Lord. And he was looking forward to this opportunity. So I think it's a very good lesson for us to see how a great devotee is willing to sacrifice anything, even his very life. His reputation, he couldn't care less about it. Bhishma couldn't care less about his reputation. He was willing to sacrifice his reputation completely for the service of the Lord. And we need to look at ourselves. Are we willing to do that? Are we willing to sacrifice everything for Krishna's pleasure? And again, I think that's a thing of introspection. Of course, you can take guidance from senior devotees to get some idea, but really you have to look at within yourself and analyze your motives. And I think whatever we do in life, it's always good to analyze your motives, and not just superficially, oh yes, I'm doing this for Krishna, I'm doing this for those, but really look at it. It's like, is that really why you're doing it? Or are you doing it to draw attention to yourself in some way? Are you doing it to glorify yourself? Are you doing it to satisfy the self or satisfy the senses? Because there's different, like we talk about regular principles and things like that. So there's different types of anarthas or contamination. Artha means something which gives benefit, which is gives benefit to the self or profit or whatever. Anartha is the opposite. It's not beneficial for the self. So we have these anarthas. Artha can also mean wealth, brings wealth to the self, but anarthas, they actually bring poverty to the self. So the different anarthas, like we talk about things like meat eating, illicit sex, intoxication, gambling, these are the gross sinful activities. But then there's more subtle things like puja, pratishta, lobha, greed, envy. There's this desire for distinction, for worship, People like to sit on a big seat, have someone come and bathe their feet, bow down at them, before them. These things, some people are very attracted to this type of stuff. We need to analyze, am I doing this like, I lead a big kirtan, like I'm a great kirtani, and I lead the big kirtan, and people are going, oh, so-and-so Dasaki Jai, so-and-so Dasaki Jai, they're chanting my name, it feels so good. We have to really analyze ourselves and see what is our motive. Why do we do things? Are we really doing it for Krishna's pleasure, or is there some payoff for us in that one, in what we're doing? And it's the most difficult thing to look at ourselves. It's easy to look at others and find faults, very easy. And that's why most people do it. It's because it's so easy to point a finger at someone and say, oh, they're this and they're this and they're that. But to look at the self is quite painful, because you start to see all your different anarthas. And this is where the guru is very expert, or hopefully very expert, is the guru can see the anartha of the disciple, and the guru points out these anarthas. And that's why you see some people are reluctant to take a guru, because they don't want to find out about these things. They're happy in their ignorance. They say that ignorance is bliss. What's that saying? 'Tis folly to be wise where ignorance is bliss. So when people are like they're happy about being ignorant, what's the point of trying to present knowledge to them? Because they're not interested in it. So, I think it's really something you need to, like someone else can point things out to you, but unless you're willing to accept it, you'll not change it. So you need to, be introspective and look at yourself and try to identify your anarthas, try to identify your shortcomings, and move forward from that. Yeah? Anything else? Yeah.
There's something about conquering sleep. Is it sleep?
Conquering.
How to conquer sleep? There's something there.
What was that?
I think I missed it. But there was something like a strategy.
By spiritual culture. Yeah. Huh? Yeah, just by culturing the spiritual process, because, it's just reflecting on this today. Because we were talking about, like I was leaving from Brajendra's house, and he's got one of these electric gate things on the door, for the garage. And I was reflecting that Mukunda Goswami, he recently put a electric thing on his gate to get into his house. And, as you get older, the body starts to fail. To get in and out of a car is a difficult thing. Just to walk around, you lose your balance and stuff like that. But I see, like with someone like Mukunda Goswami, even though his faculties, his body is dwindling, slowly but surely, still his mind is as sharp as a tack. And generally we see with devotees it's like that. But with non-devotees, as the body dwindles, because they're so heavily identifying with the body, they generally also tend to, like their external consciousness and everything kind of dwindles to the body, and they sort of go within themselves. But a devotee, because they're cultivating spiritual consciousness, even though they may not have full realization of the soul being separate from the body, you can see that is becoming prominent in the way they work. They're actually, their consciousness, their intellect stays sharp, even though the body is dwindling. And you'll see that, in so many devotees who have passed away, and that their intellect is completely sharp. I remember visiting Venugopal Prabhu not long before he passed away, and he was still, the same person, just the body was dwindling. So.
And another question, with the leaders, you said that ladies are quite an inspiration, to be an inspiration to the male.
Yeah.
Our leaders, we certainly recommend them to have such a woman in their lives to be the inspiration, that have to be shy. But there are some leaders, this is more like a general comment, they prefer not to have that kind of a woman in their life, but they prefer to have the other kind.
Yeah, because why? What's their main purpose with that kind of relationship? Is to gratify their senses. Yeah, they just want to have sex. That's all. They usually have, like, young, attractive-looking young women, who are willing to have sex at the drop of a hat because it gratifies their senses. They're not really understanding what the higher purpose of life is. They're not understanding, as it says, Nate vidu swatikatim Vishnu. They do not know. They've got no idea what the goal of life is. They think it's sense gratification. They think it's to have, a nice, palatial house or a penthouse apartment or whatever in the suburbs or in the inner city or wherever it is they like, and have nice car, nice family, beautiful wife, colour TV set in every room, etc., etc., etc. They're thinking this is the goal of life, but that's also temporary. How long does it last? How long does your wealth last? How long does your position last? Gone in a moment sometimes we see. Just gone in a moment. Everything. Like there was this guy, Alan Bond, who was a big wealthy person in Australia. Hugely wealthy. And his wealth just dwindled overnight. It was worth nothing. And he died a very lonely, unhappy man a few years ago. So it's like when we place our faith in these fallible soldiers, we become very disturbed. We become very just completely destitute in this world. But when we place and I was making this point last night to a devotee I was talking to, is like we can try to place our faith in our intellect. We can try to place our faith in our friends and this thing and that thing. But really, there's only one place to place your faith. And there's only one shelter you can take which will actually save you. And that's the lotus feet of Krishna. He's the only shelter in this world. And only wise people do that. Everyone else is trying to take shelter of their senses, of their mind, of their intelligence, of their family, of their friends, of their job, of their nation, of humanity. And just look at it. I mean, how often are people failed by these things? Repeatedly. Repeatedly let down. But if you place your faith in Krishna, just like we see the previous chapter, Kunti, she placed her faith in Krishna. Uttara, she placed her faith in Krishna. And they were saved. Bhishma here, he's placing his faith in Krishna. He's not trying to take shelter. He doesn't want to take shelter. I mean, he's probably, in a previous purport, two verses ago, it was saying that actually Bhishma was a greater personality than Vyasa, which is quite a statement for Prabhupada to say. He's a greater personality than Vyasa. Yet, even though he was such a great personality, he did not take shelter of his knowledge. He did not take shelter of his military prowess, his strength, or anything like that. Where did he take shelter? The greatest personality, where did he take shelter? At the lotus feet of Krishna. So that's the only safe place in this world, is the lotus feet of Krishna. A little louder. Like? But you weren't here at the start of the class.
No, I missed it. I was getting ready for it. And the other thing was he failed to protect Draupadi in the court.
No, the thing is like, if you understand, like Bhishmadev, okay, he is a Mahajan. He is a greatly exalted devotee. He's actually experiencing prem. Right? He's not an ordinary personality. Therefore, he understands the mind of the Lord. He understands what the Lord's desire is. Therefore, he knew for him to fight on the other side was Krishna's desire. He's not acting. He doesn't have any personal intention in it. He just wants to act to please the Lord. So the fact that he was able to give up his life for the Lord's service, because he understood that the Lord wants the Pandavas to be the rulers of the world. But he also saw that he doesn't want them to get it so easily. He wants them to fight for it. And also, he wants me to be on the other side. He understood that. That there was reasons behind everything. It's not like it's an accidental thing. Here's Bhishma, this great personality, and he fights on the wrong side. No. How can that happen? He fought on the right side. He fought on the side Krishna wanted him to be on. Because if he was fighting on the side of the Pandavas, how would this situation have come? Who on the side of the Kauravas could have killed Bhishma? None of them. So where would this situation then have occurred where Bhishma would be in a situation where he'd give up his life like this and be speaking Dharma for 2 months and then die with Krishna standing in front of him. So you have to look like, that's the problem. It's like when we look at the externals, when we try to understand the transcendental situation with by externals, we try to understand Krishna's devotees by externals, we just get confused. So devotees' business is try to delve deeply into the transcendental knowledge and understand these things from the transcendental perspective. There's, what's that verse? Vaishnavera kriya mudra vigena bujai. Prabhupada says a Vaishnava poet said that. I think it was him who said that. It says Vaishnavera kriya mudra vigena bujai. You cannot understand the activities of a Vaishnava. To try to look, materially, you can't understand. To try to think, oh, look at the mistakes that Bhishma. No, he made no mistake. No mistake. He was acting according to Krishna's will. He was perfectly situated. He understood what Krishna's desire was. Therefore, he fought on the other side. So, perfectly situated. Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki, Jai Nitai Go Premanandi. Hare Krishna. I've been here a few days. I'm leaving today. I'm going to the farm. That's right.
How long are you here for?
I'm leaving today for the farm.
Okay. And you're back on
Thursday night I'll come back, and then I'll leave Friday morning.
I see you again.
Okay. Nice to see you. Haribol, Mata.
Haribol.
Jai Dita Bandhu Prabhu.
Huh?
How are you?
Going on by Radha Gopinath's grace.
I attended your class yesterday. Very nice. Thank you.
You were, the Bhagavatam.
Yeah. I was hiding in the corner.
No, I saw you there.
Yeah.